We'll shift gears into section number 2, which is, again, cancer and cancer treatment related cognitive changes. What can we do about it? So I'm going to talk about some common strategies that people anecdotally have found helpful, but I'll also talk about what our current research is indicating. So there are any number of strategies to deal with, I'll use the term here, chemobrain, even though we've said it's not the perfect term. The first step in most situations would be, what can we fix, right? We may not be able to totally intervene with the cancer-related and cancer treatment-related changes in the brain, but what we can potentially do first is try to mitigate some of the other things that might be making it worse. And 3 of the biggest culprits for making it worse are the cancer-related fatigue that is just so prevalent across the board, all types of cancer, all types of treatment. Distress, which would be defined as either anxiety and or depression, both of which can not help cognitive function. And then number 3 is sleep disturbance or insomnia, which is also extremely common given a cancer diagnosis and cancer treatment. So we'll spend a little bit of time on those 3 things, and then we'll shift gears and talk about some of the other things on this slide. So let's start with fatigue and with sleep disturbance. There's a type of intervention now called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. You might hear it abbreviated CBT-I or CBTI, a component of which is helping people change some of their patterns or to sleep, but also some of their reactions to the frustration that can happen if they're not sleeping well. But a big component of what this involves is something called sleep hygiene. So I'm just going to kind of give you a taste of that today so that you can get a kind of sense for what it's like. Part of what sleep hygiene would entail is training your brain to associate the bed with sleep. So one of the steps is to only use the bed for sleep and intimacy, but not use the bed for work or for catching up on your correspondence or for spending a lot of time with a blue screen like an iPad or an iPhone or a television, because that blue light can be somewhat stimulating when you're trying to wind down at night and get ready for bed. Also, keeping the room very dark, because as I mentioned, light is stimulating, keeping the room very quiet, and keeping the room pretty cool, because all of those things can also help with sleep. The timing of when someone goes to bed and gets up every day should try to be as consistent as possible, because that's related to your circadian rhythms and trains your body about, okay, now it's time for bed, now it's time for sleep. I'm going to get the amount of sleep that's good for me, and then I'm going to get it up at the same time every day so that my body maintains a good clock. Some people will wear earplugs or a sleep mask to help with the darkness and the sound. Some people will use white noise. That can be soothing for some people. It's recommended to not exercise right before you go to bed because that's stimulating, but it is important to exercise because that helps build your sleep drive during the day, will help you fall asleep better. It's recommended that you not too close to bedtime. Alcohol actually will help you fall asleep, but it will prevent you from good, consistent sleep throughout the night. It's very commonly associated with frequent awakenings, which can hurt your sleep quality. So all of these things are kind of components of sleep hygiene that help you get more quality sleep, which then helps reduce the cancer-related fatigue, both of which can help with cognitive function. I mentioned that we talk a little bit about nutrition today. I mentioned earlier in segment 1 that inflammation, an inflammatory response to the cancer and cancer treatment are part of the reason why we have issues with cognitive function. It turns out that nutrition can also play a role in the inflammatory response, not just for cancer, but for some other types of diseases as well. And the American diet is not ideal. We have a lot higher ratio of omega-6 fatty acids than we do to omega-3 fatty acids. And it's a lot better if that can be more of a 1-to-1 ratio, if you will. So some of the foods that contribute to inflammation are things like fried foods, foods that are higher in sugar or sugar additives, processed foods, particularly things that have hydrogenated or processed oils on board, and then meat that is corn or grain fed. On the other side of the slide, you can see foods that are anti-inflammatory. Fish is a good source of omega-3 fatty acids, as are oils that are not hydrogenated or processed, like flaxseed or canola oil. Avocados, a wonderful food in terms of getting omega-3 fatty acids, and having a diet that's higher in grains and vegetables and legumes than some of these other types of food can be good for brain health. One of the probably ideal diets we could look at is the Mediterranean diet, which is also really good for cardiovascular health, where you're having pretty small amounts of meat, but larger amounts of vegetables and multigrains, and at least a fourth of your plate is protein, with the other part of your plate being foods that are high in antioxidants. And those are typically foods that are very colorful, like the ones that you see that are here for you on this plate. So what we eat can help with brain health. I'll spend a little bit of time today talking about mindfulness, which we can spend a lot of time on, but mindfulness strategies have been shown to be very helpful in reducing anxiety, helping with depression, helping with better sleep, but also in kind of helping people be in the moment, as opposed to always worrying about things that are ahead or behind. Mindfulness strategies can help decrease sort of the vicious cycle that gets set up when you begin to struggle with word finding or with short-term memory or with multitasking. And taking a break periodically throughout the day to kind of do a mental reset can be really helpful for people. Interestingly, one of the other contributing factors to cognitive issues can be loneliness or social isolation. And being able to have a support group of family and friends that are like your tribe or your pod, if you will, can be very beneficial to cognitive function. And a side benefit of having a group like that is if you need some help with remembering things, people are really anxious to know what they can do to help. And maybe having them help share responsibilities for some of the tasks that you're juggling so that you can focus more on the things that are important to you would be a positive strategy. I mentioned that people sometimes have trouble driving places. The GPS is a lot of people's new best friend. Now that we have smartphones and we have Garmin's and all those other wonderful tools to help us get from point A to point B, can be something that's helpful. And a real positive coping strategy, if you will, is to maintain a way to deal with some of the frustration that goes along with what we're talking about today. Other behavioral strategies that people find practical and useful are different ways to write down what you want to remember. Some people have sticky notes plastered on everything. Some people use tech note prompts like their smartphone or their Apple Watch. Other people will find different ways to make the activities that are most important to them organized in such a way that they can accomplish their priorities. One other strategy is to do things that require the most mental effort at the time of day when you have the most energy, because we know that fatigue can really impact your ability to concentrate and focus. Mind-challenging activities are something that's been suggested. Things like Sudoku or crossword puzzles, some people find are helpful, but probably the underlying reason behind doing something that's new and different or challenging, something that's novel to you, is it actually helps your brain form new pathways when you challenge your brain to do something different. So maybe you've never played a musical instrument before, or maybe you've never tried to learn a foreign language, or maybe you haven't ever tried to paint. Something that's outside of your box, something new and different that would be novel way to stimulate your brain can help form new neural pathways, which is known to be helpful for brain function. So as far as the research goes, beyond the strategies that we just talked about, there's really three kind of primary areas of research right now that look really, really promising. One area of research has to do with exercise, physical activity. One area of research has to do with mindfulness, which I talked about briefly. And the third area of research has to do with cognitive rehabilitation, which is an umbrella term for cognitive training, cognitive behavioral training, and psychoeducation. The exercise piece can be really, really helpful for so many different reasons. We know that exercise can reduce the risk of cancer recurrence in many types of cancers. We know that exercise can reduce fatigue. We know that exercise can improve sleep drive. And excitingly, it may also decrease those products of inflammation that I told you about. So the recommendation is to find a way that's sustainable for you, something that you don't hate doing, that you can sneak in 150 minutes a week of some type of physical activity. It could even just be walking. It doesn't have to be running a marathon or anything, real aggressive, but to stay active is a very positive thing to do. I talked a little bit about mindfulness. There's actually physiologic evidence that mindfulness techniques will down-regulate the stress response and will decrease those markers of inflammation that I told you about. And then, as I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. And I noticed the time is just evaporating. So I may go quickly through a couple of these slides so we can make sure we have time for session 3. But as I mentioned, exercise is very, very helpful. A study that we did a few years ago showed that women with breast cancer who reported cognitive issues, we looked at whether or not they were carrying extra weight, so body mass index, because we know that can be sometimes associated with issues with inflammation. We also looked at how active they were, how much exercise they were doing every day. What we found at the end of this study is that women who were overweight, but who exercised a lot, actually reported less issues with cognitive function than women who were overweight, who were sedentary. So actually, exercise mitigated the potentially negative impact of carrying extra weight on brain function. We did another study recently where we compared 2 types of exercise to a support group. One type of exercise was a mindfulness-based type of exercise called Qigong, which has a series of movements and postures, but also focuses on breathing techniques and clearing one's mind and being mindful of being in the moment. Kind of all wraps up Qigong. It's a lot like Tai Chi, but it's easier to perform, and really you could even doing it lying down if you needed to. So any person, no matter what their performance status with, could do Qigong. Gentle exercise was a comparison group, which mindfulness piece with the focus on the breath. And we compared those 3 groups for report of cognitive function pre and post, and found that there were improvements actually in all 3 groups. But the group that did the Qigong had a significant reduction in distress and also had a significant improvement in their self-reported cognitive function. So we felt that combining exercise and mindfulness might be a really positive strategy, kind of get two benefits for one, if you will. Then the cognitive rehabilitation program that we've been studying now for a few years is called Emerging from the Haze. And it's a series of classes, which we used to do in person, but now we do online, that really spend a lot of time on some of the strategies I'm talking with you about. Exercise, we spend time on nutrition, we spend time on how to manage negative thoughts, and we lead people in a series of experiential exercises that are geared to help with short-term memory and also some coping strategies to help work around if your short-term memory is giving you problems. So this program was developed out at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and we've studied it now several times. The first study that we did was for women with breast cancer, and we had them let us know by filling out questionnaires how they felt about their cognitive function before taking the program and at the completion of taking the program, and then for several months after. And we compared people that had received the program to a wait list group who had not yet had a chance to go through the program. And we found that the people that had been through the intervention had a significant improvement in their self-reported cognitive function. We also did some little finger stick blood spot tests for the people that were taking part in this study to look at the association between omega-3 fatty acids and brain health. And those results, better ratios of omega-3 fatty acids reported less issues with cognitive function. When COVID hit, we shifted gears on this research to a completely virtual format and just did a single arm pilot to make sure people liked it. We had a great retention rate. We still saw significant improvement in cognitive function. And we got some feedback from people that the original program was done once a week for 6 weeks because it was to try to keep people from having to drive in LA traffic at Cedars-Sinai. When we shifted to a completely Zoom format, people said, you know what, keep all this content, it's great, don't drop anything, but make the sessions shorter. So now we do it once a week over 10 weeks. And the study that we have going on right now, which I'll tell you about in session 3, is looking at a live delivery versus a pre-recorded delivery. Because if we can determine that both of those are equally effective, this program would be a lot easier to share across the United States. We didn't worry about time zones. So that's the end of section 2. We'll take a few questions before we get down into the current and future research.
Once again, either jump in verbally or put your questions in the chat.
And I apologize, since I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the chat, so I'll be dependent on Judy to read those to me.
Well, Jamie, I did notice in your slide on sleep hygiene that one of the strategies was to use a red night light. And I wonder if you could discuss why that's effective. I know you said the blue screen is stimulating. Is the red screen calming, or what's the rationale for that?
You know, Judy, that's a really interesting question. And I have to admit to you that I didn't even see the red nightlight on that slide when I grabbed that image. I've actually not personally used that, and I don't know the answer.
Well, thank you.
I've
never seen that before, so I thought it was interesting.
Well, it is interesting, and now I'm going to have to go look it up so I can answer it next time.
So I hadn't, hi, this is Karen. I hadn't heard of that before either, but I just did a quick Google search, and somebody is saying that there's a theory that the red light wavelengths stimulate production of melatonin. And so melatonin is the hormone that helps us to sleep, and your brain releases more melatonin as darkness falls, yada, yada. So, but I haven't researched it either. I'm not that familiar with it.
Well, thank you for
checking that, Karen.
That's great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I had never seen that before, Jamie, so it really struck me when I saw it. My
Right.
other question is, you talk about mindfulness exercises. Is there a resource that our participants could look at online and get some ideas for mindfulness exercises?
There are tons of resources online, and what I probably can do is I'll grab a few of those and send them to you after the meeting, and then you can disseminate them. How's that sound?
That would be great. Thank you.
You betcha.